we just got news of Tom Holland being cast as Nathan Drake for an Uncharted movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping that that movie is not horrible. Games that have become movies have been notoriously bad over the last
They have
10 or 15 years.
I was responsible for one. Unfortunately, we developed the Blood Rain license at Majesco where I worked, and um, then my superiors wanted to leverage that into a film. Uh, we moved it around the people in Hollywood and unfortunately, and in Europe, and unfortunately, one of the people who came forward was Uwe Boll, who's not exactly the most prolific filmmaker.
Uwe,
Um,
Uwe Boll's known for like House of the Dead and Blood Rain and some other
slasher
stickers.
movies, but he did Blood Rain, which I've caught many times at 4 in the morning on my channels, and it's nice to see a film, a product you create, become that type of film. I would have preferred a more mainstream director.
I definitely would love a modern Blood Rain video game.
Well, that may very well be in the mix. I'm actually still working with some of the folks who previously owned Majesco, and I can tell you that may be one of the things that they're looking at doing for 2020 and 2021.
We I love vampires. I love anything to do with them. So that's a tremendously cool IP. And Blood Blood Rain needs a revival. If anyone can hear me, Blood Rain needs a revival.
That's correct. It should, yes. It should get a revival.
This is one of those things where you forget what you're gonna say next. In talking about Blood Rain, there's just something cool about the vampire mystique, and I grew up playing the Legacy of Kain games.
Oh, sure, yes.
Which were equally as amazing, but it's too bad the Blood Rain movie wasn't as good because Kristana Loken
Mm-hmm.
is a really good actress. Well, she's not great, but she's not bad.
No, she wasn't bad.
Not bad at
And
all.
she carried the film for whatever it had, and I'm sure we will follow it up at some point with a modern version, at least in the game world.
I figured I should let you know. There's a company out there called Limited Run Games that they just put out. I think it just came out this Friday, but they did a limited edition of Psychonauts for the PS4.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which Dan worked on Psychonauts.
I have the opportunity to have worked on Psychonauts and produced that game with Tim and his crew over at Double Fine, and that was just an incredible product. We picked it up kind of in midstream at Majesco, and met Tim and met his developers, and just awestruck with his past work and what he had done, and saw the early playables on it, and we just absolutely wanted to put out Psychonauts. So that was a real pleasure to work with Tim on that product.
Psychonauts would be a great game that could be made into a film.
I agree, absolutely.
Specifically like Pixar or Illumination.
Yes.
I'd like one of those studios to do a Psychonauts game. Hell, I'd love them to do a decent Mario adaptation.
Yes.
I think only Pixar and Illumination could pull something like
agree.
that off.
I absolutely agree.
And plus, we need to erase our minds from Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo. No offense to the late Bob Hoskins or John Leguizamo. You guys are great, but that movie, not so great. Now, your favorite system to develop games for?
My favorite system over the years is still the Atari 2600.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the one I cut my teeth on. I think I did 8 titles on that for Activision. As I'd mentioned, Crackpots, Ghostbusters, River Raid 2, Kung Fu Master. For Atari, I did Crossbow. I worked on Double Dragon. And that is the game system that I really fell in love with. As a matter of fact, for Chris, I was able to find on that on that internet, was able to find a copy of my original Crackpots 2600 game, which I'm giving to Chris, and which leads me into this next item. So we did a number of games at Activision. We would work for 6-7 months, do a product, give it to the Activision marketing group, and they would put it together and launch it. And then we were free to come up with our next concept. Well, I'm sure you all remember in 1993, the great crash of the video game business, where everyone learned to program the Atari 2600. There was no real coordination of quality, and people would come out with products that didn't sell well, that ended up in these bins in the toy stores. And it was very hard to sell a $59 Activision game on the shelf when there were bins of $2 or $3 games by all of these companies, CBS, games by Apollo, all of these products. So I had been working on at Activision after Crackpots a brand new game, somewhat of a sequel to my brother's Keystone Capers game, and this was called Keystone Cannonball. And what it was a train game with a beautiful display of train cars, and the Keystone Cop was jumping on top of them, and he was trying to catch bandits, just like he had been doing in Keystone Capers, trying to stop Harry Hooligan from stealing from the department store. I made a copy of this game that was probably 40% done, burned a cartridge, took it home with me in 1983 when Activision told us to stop all our 2600 games and immediately move on to games for the then aspiring Commodore 64 platform, and forgot about it. And through the years, I had been friends with the people who ran the Classic Game Expo, and I always used to tell them, there's an Activision game that's unreleased, that's kind of hidden, lost, and I worked on it, and I'll find it someday. Well, last year, come July, I was in one of my offsite storage facilities in New Jersey, cleaning things up from the past, and lo and behold, in the box was the cartridge of Keystone Cannonball I had put in that box 35 years earlier. I was so excited. I called my friend John Hardy, who now runs the National Video Game Museum, who was one of the founders of the Classic Gaming Convention. Said, John, I finally found the game I talked to you about for 20 years. And John said, oh, please. By the time, after a while, we began to believe that game didn't exist, And he happened to be in New Jersey at the time, so he drove over to my house. We plugged the cartridge in, and up came the screen I had described to him many evenings over bottles of beer. And it looked exactly like I had thought. Very exciting, the only one of its kind, of a not finished game, but a playable game. And so I decided to donate that to the National Video Game Museum. If you Google Keystone Cannonball and Dan Kitchen, you'll see a number of articles about it. And I decided last year to complete the game finally after 35 years. And I'm completing the game. It will be finished this summer, and it's called Gold Rush. And it is a conductor similar to Keystone Kelly on a beautiful train comprised of 45 unique train cars. I'm writing it in standard 6502 with no external chips, no external hardware, just as I would have written it in 1983, sitting in the Activision lab.
Right, and I should take the time to acknowledge we have one viewer watching. They haven't said anything in the chat, but welcome to the stream. Welcome to the stream. So there is a Kickstarter to this, correct? Or has it already been backed?
No, there is a Kickstarter that is coming out in about a month. Okay. And this is a collectible card for the game that has a picture of the game screen, a picture of one of the characters. We plan to do a line of 50 or so collectible cards that will be coming out with the game. And I want you to have that, Chris, and maybe you can hold that up so they can see a little bit of the game. I should have some, I will send Chris for future broadcasts some information on the game and some videos so that he can see them. And so In a way, I am stepping back into the Atari 2600 development because, as we said earlier, that was my most enjoyable platform. And I think to this date, there's a lot of homebrew games for that system.
There's a ton of homebrew
Ton
games.
of homebrew games, but I believe I'm probably the only original Atari 2600 Activision designer who has come back 30, now 40 years later to create new games for the system. And they will be released under the name of Tiki Vision, my company. And you can find out more about it at www.dankitchengames, all one word, .com. And feel free to sign up for the newsletter there. And we will be posting screenshots and information about the game in the coming weeks.
My favorite retro console of all time. It's timeless to me. It's the Sega Genesis.
Sure, absolutely.
Love that console. But I heard you mention Double Dragon, and I kind of geeked out for a second because that is the first beat 'em up game that I actually played, and got through. It was difficult, but I got through it. So to hear that you had a hand in working on that from one system or another is incredibly cool. Now, you said you've also done some stuff for the Sega Genesis. What have you done for that?
For Sega Genesis, I had worked on Goofy's Hysterical History Tour, the Absolute Entertainment Lab, where I was a founder. We did a number of Sega Genesis Super Battle Tank. We did Sega CD Super Battle Tank. But the most infamous Sega Genesis game I had produced was Penn and Teller Smoke and Mirrors, which we know never saw the light of day, but has a growing popularity underground.
Yes, it is notorious for the game Magic. I keep saying Magic Bus. It's not the Who. Desert Bus. I'm sorry. But I have another question to ask, a couple more before we get to Desert Bus. What do you think of the stuff that Activision's done nowadays?
Oh, I think it's incredible. I mean, ironically, the chap who ran the Activision Call of Duty studio was a gentleman by the name of Glenn Schofield that I had actually hired in 1986. He was in New Jersey. He was an ad agency artist, and we knew Glenn through one of our other employees. And I remember telling Glenn, you're wasting your time doing billboards and that sort of thing. You're really good. We need an artist to do what was then black and white Game Boy games. And I remember we hired Glenn to come in. The first game he did was Rocky and Bullwinkle's Adventure on the Nintendo Game Boy, which was put out by Absolute Entertainment. Put out by THQ, I believe. We had done that as a contract project. And Glenn did a number of great games for us. He worked on Goofy with me. He worked on many, many titles while we were together. Then eventually left New Jersey, went to California, and somehow worked with Activision and was able to take the helm of the Call of Duty studio, was responsible for most of the incredible Call of Duty games. Kudos to him and the work he's done. So I think Activision has done some amazing products. They're certainly taking the current consoles and pushing them to the edge of the envelope of what their capabilities are.
They've definitely done some good ones, but they've also laid some eggs too with their movie tie-ins as well. Movie tie-ins are always one of the things that you're almost destined to lay an egg on, because you have to take so much liberties with what you're given with the source material and stuff. So that's not any fault of their own, and I'm really looking forward to the new Call of Duty coming out.
Oh, so am I.
Modern Warfare.
So am I.
Just wish they would have been a little more innovative with the title, because we've already gotten the Modern Warfare.
Well, I think they're renaming it to make anyone who say Modern Warfare remember their new title.
And I'm actually quite enthused because I did hear that this will have a campaign mode, unlike the last game that didn't have a campaign, which I'll never understand.